Well, hello there. Welcome back to another Pickled Dragon Unscripted. So I had a couple interesting questions um, that I wanted to talk about. The first one is why, and I think I've said this many times, and the person asking the question kind of talked about it, but they wanted to know why I thought the deck of many things is a campaign killer. Um, because I think there's it's based on my experiences with it, and I think there's a large number of DMs out there who might have experienced the same thing, and maybe there's DMs out there who disagree. But um, why I think the deck is a campaign killer? Well, before I get into the answer your question, I kind of wanted to make a little bit of a video about the deck of many things and um, why and not only about the deck, but some tips if you want to use it in your campaign, some tips on how to use it and how to make it really fun because it could be a really special event to use the deck of many things. But be warned, I'll explain why I think it could be a campaign killer. So, um, when we talk about the deck itself, there's actually a couple different forms of the deck. There's a 13 card lesser deck and a 22 card greater deck. Most people, when they talk about the decks, they're talking about the 22 card greater deck. Those decks are made out of their ivory plaques. So rather than an actual card, as these are, the greater deck, they're actually ivory plaques. So when we talk about a little bit building your deck, if you want to go all out, you can get some press board or something and a really thin, 1/8 inch press board or something and cut it into your, and, and, but we'll get into that. I don't want to get off track, but only 25% of the decks out there are the greater deck, and then you have the 13 card lesser deck. It's about 75% of the decks available. So if you are just doing random treasure and you roll the deck of the many things somehow, um, you'll then roll your percentile dice to see if it's a greater deck or a lesser deck. Now, there are also differences between editions. Now, just because you're running a 5e game doesn't mean you can't use the first edition or second edition deck, you know. But in any case, if assuming you're using the 22 card deck, every time a card is drawn, and a player has to declare how many cards they want to draw before they begin drawing. So, for example, if I'm very, very cautious, I might only say I only want to draw one card. They draw their one card and take a look at it, and the effect takes place. But someone could say, oh, I want to draw 7 or 8 cards, and they want to just throw all caution to the wind. Well, I mean, they can do that. So until, this is kind of a cool thing about the deck of many things, is until the number of cards has been declared, all of the cards actually appear as blanks. They just, the effect side is just blank. So you can page through a deck of many things and not have any worries. But in terms of edition differences, in first edition, if you draw probably the 2 worst cards in the deck, either Donjon or or Dungeon, if you will, if you pulled that card or the Void, um, the whole deck vanishes. And some sources say that it appears in a different plane of existence. Some sources say that it appears in the treasure hoard of some powerful being. Whatever the case, the deck is gone. So, but in 5e, They don't have that restriction. What 5e does is once you've declared your number of cards, you only have 1 hour to pull all of your cards. So if you pull your first card and it's a bad card, and you have 3 or 2 or however many more cards to go, you have 1 hour to pull those cards, even if you're terrified of the result. The consequences is the entire deck leaps into the air, and every card in the deck takes effect, which can be disastrous, absolutely disastrous. Now, anytime you draw a card, unless it's the jester or the fool, the card is replaced in the deck. That means if you declare 4 cards, you could end up with the same card multiple times. Another difference is if you're playing an older edition version, which I like the first edition version of the Void for role-playing purposes, and just I think that it gives the players an opportunity for more adventure. But the first edition Void, if you pull that card, your soul is trapped elsewhere. And it can be trapped by some powerful being or trapped in a very dangerous location, whatever the case. But the player suddenly becomes kind of an automaton. They speak in very monotone ways. They don't really have a drive to do anything. They are, just a shell of what they used to be. Whereas in 5th edition, if you draw the Void, your body becomes incapacitated. So that character is essentially out, done, until the soul is retrieved. So, whichever version you want to play, just know that there are differences, and that you may choose to run it, however you want, regardless of which version of the game you're running. So, or you could mix and match as well. Now, on to making the most of this deck of many things. There's an impulse. There's a strong impulse on many DMs' parts to want to give the party the deck, because they love to watch their players squirm and really fret. Oh, how many cards should I draw? I've seen players draw none. They're like, no, I don't want any part of this. I've seen players draw 7 and become just destroyed. But whatever the case is, I would strongly recommend that this is, obviously it's an artifact. So I would strongly recommend that it's just not part of a horde somewhere. There is a dungeon magazine, this one right here. This is issue 19 from 1989, September, October 89. And there's an adventure in there called House of Cards. And the adventure, it's actually a fairly complicated adventure. It's set in Forgotten Realms. And I think, let me just stroll on back here. Yes, it's set in the city of Westgate, and fairly large city. It's a port city, and there are a number of thieves guilds, underground mafioso style criminal organizations vying for power in the city. And each night there are nightly riots where it's not just like, a handful of thugs fighting each other. We're talking like hundreds of soldiers on either side just slugging it out. And the city of Westgate is looking for heroes to help vanquish it. Well, part of this adventure is that the deck of many things is in this adventure, but the party has an opportunity to basically find one card at a time, which is a very, very cool idea, because once you found that first card and you're just like, oh man, if we assemble this thing, there could be great riches involved. Most players that I've encountered, they focus on the benefits, the boons, rather than the drawbacks or the potential disaster that the deck could provide. But this is a great adventure in that it's assembling the deck is kind of part of the adventure. So and I'm not saying run this adventure, but if you want to incorporate the deck of many things as a treasure item, think about how you can make it just acquiring each card or assembling the deck as part of the adventure. You could even make that the ultimate goal of the entire campaign, is assembling this deck of many things. I have another book, and you'll want to develop a strong story behind it. This particular Dragon magazine, this is number 148. There is a very long story, well, not very long, a few pages, a story in here about a wizard who's just trying to study the effects of the deck of many things. And the great thing about, and that's something I didn't mention about this dungeon magazine, there is a deck of many things that you can cut out in the back of it. So if you want to assemble your own deck, you can do that here. But this particular Dragon magazine also has, but this one's in full color, a deck of many things that you can cut out and create. But this story is very interesting because it kind of spells out what the deck is all about and the pitfalls of the deck, but in kind of a narrative form. So it's very cool. And I think it would be very good for you as a DM to read it, and you can kind of get an idea how you can create this elaborate story and narrative around not only the deck, but around creating a quest or an adventure that is just centered on assembling the deck and in all of its glory and horrors. So that's really a cool aspect of it. But there are a number of PDFs out there. You can create your own. I made my own on cardstock. Obviously, you're going to want a deck. You can do this with playing cards. There's a translation for the cards to playing cards, like the Ace of Spades, relates back to a particular card and so on. But I think if you really want to wow your players, you're going to want to create your own deck. And as I said earlier, if you want to go all in, you could get some, masonite or something, very thin masonite, and cut it up and create your own cards. You could glue printed out versions. And again, there's several different versions of the deck online that you can download and print out. I did mine on cardstock. The greater decks, the 22 card decks, again, they're ivory plaques. And then the lesser decks are vellum. So you could really wow your players with a very beautiful deck. I just printed this out on my printer on cardstock, cut them out. It's got this beautiful yin and yang, which actually is important to the deck because of, there's all the good stuff that can happen, there's all the bad stuff that can happen. So I think it's important that you make the players go that extra mile to learn about the deck and its history and all of the benefits and the pitfalls. I wouldn't in my games, very powerful magic items can't be identified with artifacts, for example, can't be identified with a simple identify spell. You have to take them to sages and mystics and have their abilities studied and derived. And so that could be part of the quest as well. We've assembled this deck. We need to find somebody who can tell us all about it. And maybe that person is just somebody who has used a deck in the past. Maybe they're the sole survivor of an adventuring group that, this wizard survived and he's fabulously wealthy, but all of his companions were destroyed by the deck. So you could develop the story in that way. Um, but I think that the biggest reason I find the deck of many things to be a game killer is because you are taking your campaign, which, however, I would assume that the players are higher level if you're giving them an artifact. So you've developed this long campaign. The characters have built up a history. They've strived and worked very hard to attain the levels they have. They've fought the enemies you want them to fight. And now you're going to leave it to chance that they could pull this card and end up imprisoned in the Nine Hells or imprisoned in Pandemonium and driven insane. The dungeon card, or donjon, if you will, the dungeon card, it imprisons the character in some faraway place. And usually it's extraplanar, and usually you're imprisoned by a creature that is extremely powerful. So, yes, you can create adventure plot hooks from the deck, but what is that player going to do then? How much fun is that going to be for that player to be imprisoned somewhere? You can pull the skull card, for example, and suddenly you're fighting death, essentially. The Grim Reaper comes in. He hits automatically every single time. And you've got to blast away with and hope that you could defeat it, because if you're killed, that's it. So there's a lot of danger to the deck of many things, and you're leaving your campaign kind of up to chance. If you pull the Fool card, your character suddenly loses 10,000 experience points. Well, what does that mean for the party balance? That character loses a level. And it can change the dynamic of things. There's the Flames card. Now, the Flames card is an interesting card because that's the one that creates enmity between that character and a very powerful extraplanar being. It could be Loth, it could be Orcus, or whatever. Suddenly, that extraplanar being has to just put a bullseye on your character or on that hero, and which is interesting because you can, there's the Flames card right there. That's interesting because you can really do a lot story-wise with that, but it can also detract from your main story. You suddenly are, your characters are trying to discover the cure for some horrific plague or whatever, and now you're mixing in another story where Loth or Orcus or Beelzebub or whoever has an inferior player, and I think it can detract from that story a little bit. But the flip side to that is what happens when your character pulls some of the more powerful cards, the cards that give them 50,000 experience. So suddenly that character is launched way ahead of the rest of the party. It creates an imbalance that the DM then has to deal with. But so I don't, unless the entire campaign is meant to assemble the deck of many things with, I think is a very cool idea, actually. Just throwing the deck of many things in for fun can be dangerous. Now, again, you can do the lesser deck, and you pull out some 9 cards that have some of the more drastic effects in them. And I believe that this Dragon magazine has an even lesser deck of many things in it, so you can actually tone it down even more from that. So, if you really want to have the fun of the of the draw, you can still do that, But I would, my suggestion is whenever you have a really powerful item, is to make an event out of it. Put a quest around it, put a story around it, put a story around just the idea of, now I've obtained this item. Now what does it do? Finding somebody who's experienced with the item. Now, that said, there's another twist to the deck of many things. For you Curse of Strahd people out there, there's another Dragon magazine that you'll want. Dragon magazine number 77. This one is interesting. It doesn't have to be Curse of Strahd, but it's the first thing I thought of. It's called the Tarot of Many Things. So you take a 78, this Dragon magazine takes the 78 card tarot deck and assigns stories to each card. Each card has a little story laid out in it, and a benefit and a detriment. So, for example, if you're experienced with the tarot, you'll know that if the card, when you flip a card and it lands face up towards the person who's reading it, that means one thing. But if it's upside down, so after shuffling the cards, you want at least half of the cards to be one way and half of the cards to be the other. It's called reversed. When it's reversed, it means another thing. It could be a horrible penalty. So one way here, the High Priestess, when it's face up, the drawer gains 1 point of wisdom, but 2 if they are a cleric or druid. Reversed signifies superficiality, conceit, shallowness, a lack of depth of perception, of understanding. So reversed, that's a bad thing. The drawer loses the wisdom and 2 points if they're a cleric or druid. So it takes all 78 cards and of the tarot deck and assigns deck of many things style stories and benefits to each of them. And I could just see, the Vistani, she's doing her little card reading and she pulls out this special deck and asks you if you want to take a chance. Or perhaps the Vistani send the party on a quest for this deck. Maybe they'll help you against Strahd if you find the deck for them. And maybe the party finds the deck and they just can't resist. They got to start flopping some cards out of it. And they may not even understand the idea that the cards, if it's reversed or face up, or they may not even understand that that's a good thing or a bad thing. So there's so much you can do with this one magic item. And I hope that if you choose to use it, that you do so with a lot of flair and gusto, because it's this huge opportunity for a lot of fun for your group. But if you're running a very story-driven campaign, I warn you against it, because it not only can it derail your campaign, it can distract from the main story if you draw certain cards. But again, that's just me. Maybe there's other dungeon masters who have had completely different experience with it. I've used the deck 3 times in the past, typically at the end of a campaign when the story is resolved, and maybe I know there was one time they found it as part of the treasure hoard of the villain that they had just overcome. So it was kind of a fun thing to do while wrapping up the campaign. And yes, we did have people draw Void and Dungeon and all that good stuff. And maybe if you want to, if you pull Dungeon, maybe the high level characters at the end of the campaign, and you want to play a few more sessions and go rescue their pal. So there's that. So I also have some other questions from you guys. And I'm going to go over, there's so many here, but the first one at the top of the list here, would love to hear you talk about how to help brand new players. I mean, they don't even know their elves from their gnomes, not feel overwhelmed. I think that I think that first of all, you're going to want to start out low level, and I think I covered this in a previous video. Start out low level, give them a very simple class to play. Although if they want to jump in, there are some people they want to play that wizard, they want to play that warlock. You know, they never played Dungeons and Dragons before, but they still want to jump in feet first, and that's fine. But for some people who are nervous about the rules, you gotta allow them to have a buddy that they can bounce ideas off of or ask questions to. You know, I've said before, my table, we don't allow coaching, but if I have a brand new player, we suspend that for a while for that player. But you also have to let them make their own decisions in the end. We give them a variety of options, and they get to pick one, and they get to see how things unfold. But so another question that was asked is, how much is too much information when writing an adventure? Some modules give a lot of dialogue and others leave it vague. Is there a preference to what most DMs prefer, you think? Man, I tell you what, I think that is very specific to DMs. I mean, it's a wide range of people. I know that there are people who write very efficient adventures, short, concise, but written in such a fashion that it gives the DM enough information to take off and just launch and have a hoard of knowledge at their disposal, or inspire them to have all this knowledge at disposal. The Arcane Library is very good about that. I myself, I'm the reverse. I can't stop writing. I write and write. I just unload as much information out there as I can, because I come up with an idea and I keep writing, and that idea spawns other ideas, and I keep writing. So in my adventures, NPCs tend to be very well developed, and there's a lot of text given to the story itself. So it really depends. I like to have a very robust adventure because, you know, maybe it gives me ideas on what I should or what I could be using. But if I want to disregard it and do my own thing, I can do that. But it might inspire me to come up with a story that I find more interesting than what's written down. But maybe it's kind of in the same vein, you know. But I can't really answer that. I think that there's some people that just love a ton of information, and there's some people that love that very concise writing that takes the adventure to the point. And maybe it has to do with the experience level of the DM. But you know, I think it's very specific to the DM themselves. So I would say that for me, I like lots of information. But anyway, that's what I got for you this week. I hope you guys, if you choose to use the deck of many things, you go all in. Keep encouraging players to join gaming. Dungeons and Dragons is just, it's such an inspiring game, at least for me, to help my imagination explode, if you will, with ideas. It keeps my mind occupied when maybe I'm stuck somewhere and I don't have much to do. If I'm in the waiting room of the doctor or whatever, and oftentimes D&D is what I'm thinking about in the next big adventure. I also have something interesting coming up. We have I had been, before my injury, I was running a piracy campaign, an evil aligned campaign where they had like bits and pieces of this treasure map that they had assembled, and they had just assembled the map and had arrived at this remote, strange island, and the Isle of Dread. I'm using the Isle of Dread as a basis, but I'm gonna expand on it. But anyway, we're starting that up again tomorrow. So I might have some campaign clips of that coming. So with all that in mind, I hope you guys have a great time gaming, happy gaming, and as always, be heroic.